Rugby stats, folks. If you've followed this channel for any length of time, you will know I love delving into the stats, which teams get the run meters and bust tackles and offload more. I do feel like it adds a layer of context and a layer of value onto the game to put numbers next to what you are seeing with your eyes when you watch the teams play. But sometimes they can be misleading. We're going to talk about 5 stats today, which I think can be a little bit misleading and often need to be paired with that kind of eye test for a bit of context. Stats notorious in things outside of rugby as well for being used to mislead people. But we'll go through 5 because there's one game recently, that All Blacks and Stormers game, which reminded me of the one rugby stat which I really think sucks, especially the way the broadcasters mention it. But we'll get to some other ones first. I'll save that one for last because I genuinely think it's the worst stat out there. We're going to start with one which is kicks, which is still a pretty decent stat. I still feel like you can get some good value out of the kicking stat. You can see genuinely which teams kick more. Like Steve Borthwick's team for England, genuinely across his time in charge of England, has kicked a lot. And it's, again, it meets with your eye test. You look at England and you go, geez, they're kicking a lot. And then you look, wow, 40 kicks a game. That's quite a lot. Russie's Springboks side, you see the variation. Sometimes they kick the leather off the ball. Other games, they really rein it in. And Dave Rennie's side for the All Blacks recently, really low kicking. It's quite an interesting one to see. But the reason I put kicks on here is that not all kicks are created equal, in that kicks is a generic stat for every time in general play. It doesn't include like restarts and shots at goal and whatnot, but anytime in general play someone's put boot to ball, it could be an up and under, it could be a kick for distance, it could be a grubber. They are all lumped into kicks, and those kicks genuinely are all quite different. I, for one, would love to see a more detailed breakdown when you read the stats page that, you know, how many times they grubber, how many times they put in a high ball, and how many times they kick long. Maybe it's too much to ask because there will be times when it's a hard one to draw a line between, was that a kick over the top or was that a kick for distance, if it's kind of in between the two. But kicks get lumped all into one stat. As I said, I think the usefulness is still pretty good. And generally, teams with loads of kick numbers are teams who play that strategy of game. But like I said, they can be a little bit misleading in that not all kicks are the same. The next one is kind of similar, and I'm going to say lineout percentage. The reason I say lineout percentage is because it only tells you the team throwing the ball in, did they secure possession on their own lineout throw. It doesn't tell you anything about how clean or useful that ball was, just whether they retained it. So I still think it's a pretty useful stat, and genuinely teams who've had lineout issues, like in recent times, as I record this video, Ireland's lineout has looked a bit shaky, and it's been reflected in the stats. But it doesn't tell you maybe a team, they were actually under a lot of pressure at lineout time. They bobbled a few and maybe the halfback had to pick it up, or some prop had to just dive on it, or it didn't go to the intended guy and they couldn't pull off any moves that they were expecting, that kind of thing. It only tells you whether they got the ball or not. So it's still pretty useful. Like I said, teams with higher lineout stats generally have better operating lineouts, but you could look at a team have issues at lineout time and then after a match go, wow, they were still at 89%. That's pretty good. It felt worse when I watched it. So it is one that I feel like you do need to keep in mind. We're getting the top 3, I feel like, are more, I don't want to say more controversial, but more taken out of context, don't give you the information you want. The third one I'm going to put in is tackle percentage. I've heard some pundits out there say tackle percentage is basically a useless stat, and I don't think that's quite right, because I would say generally teams who finish towards the bottom of the tables or have, you know, defensive woes generally have low tackle percentages. Like, I looked at the Super Rugby stats just as a quick prep for this video, and sure, 2 of the 3 teams who finished in the bottom 3 for tackle percentages were well outside the playoffs. Like Moana Pacifica and the Fijian and Drua had poor tackle percentages by Super Rugby standards in the kind of mid-80s. the Brumbies were also in that mix as well, but they did make the playoffs. So it's not a universal truth, but I think generally teams with worse defense have lower tackle percentages. But the reason I say it kind of doesn't necessarily pass the eye test as well is because some teams, especially the ones who play like a blitz or a high line speed defense, will naturally have lower tackle percentages because guys are shooting out of the line, not necessarily trying to make a tackle. They will make a tackle if they get a chance to, but their job is more to disrupt the play than necessarily to make a full-on tackle. Like Faf de Klerk and like Peter Seftotoy used to do this all the time for the Springboks, and you would sometimes see, oh man, the tackle percentage is bad. 81%, what's the terrible defense? But no, actually these guys will just blitzing up, Jacques Nienaber style, missing a few tackles, but disrupting the pass enough that maybe the next guy could make his tackle. So two guys go in, one blitzes to disrupt the play, the second guy's able to make the tackle, they're behind the advantage line, but you've seen two tackles attempted, one's made and one's missed, 50%, terrible. So tackle percentage genuinely requires a bit more context than just bad tackle percentage equals bad defense. Like you've seen some other teams finish a game with like 90% or 95% tackle, maybe not 95, probably 95 in one instance or two, but generally like you might see a team which is like 90 plus, but still shipped like 40 points because they weren't missing tackles. Like they could have conceded 4 maul tries. They didn't miss a single tackle on the way, or their defense could have been so broken. There was just a clean line break. Nobody even had a chance to make a tackle as some guy just canted in for the line and scored a try. So tackle percentage can be useful, but definitely needs context. The next one is the one that you see pop up on the screen prior to scrums, and that's like the weight, the pack weight in particular. Again, I think it's moderately useful and that it will generally give you some pretty decent info, but to say it's like set in stone or concrete would be a mistake because, I mean, if you or I were to guess our own weight right now, how accurate do you think you would get it? Would you get it down to a kilo? Would you get it down to half a kilo? Within 2 kilos? Within 5 kilos? I don't know. Our weights all fluctuate, and you're looking at 8 guys against 8 guys who are sports people whose weights go up and down throughout the season, depending on what part of the season they're in, pre-season or end of season. Vastly different weights. When were these guys weighed that their weight goes on the screen? I just had a quick look. I've just picked who's a famous prop right now. I picked Oxenche from South Africa because he's pretty well known. He's literally the first one I looked up. I was like, let's see what his weight is listed as. One site has him at 117 kgs. Another site has him at 120, another 122, another 123. So which one do you believe? Just with that one guy, there's a 6 kilo variation between heaviest and lightest. And you multiply that by 8 guys on each side, you got a big swing of potential different weights here. Maybe on average, it still probably works out that it's more or less correct, but there's no guarantees about it. So weight is a very difficult one to measure. I mean, Aaron Smith on Twitter, it's not weight, it was height. But I remember years ago on Twitter, somebody asked him about his height, and it was different from what was listed online. And his response to that was, yeah, I grew 2 centimeters since under 20s, because his playing height listed online was the height that they'd measured him at when he was at under 20s, and it had never been updated. So he had to tell people, no, I'm actually a little bit taller than that. That's incorrect. Gregor Brown, I remember from the Lions tour, was listed as anywhere between like 6 foot, was it 6'4"? Less than 6'4", 6'3" or 6'2", and like 6'6". Like there's a big difference, like a massive difference between genuinely guys short lock, reasonably sized flanker to like a genuinely bit of tall timber. So yeah, weight and height to a lesser degree can be ones that, you know, depends on which source you read, can vary, depends on when they took it. So I wouldn't recommend it as kind of a concrete one, but as a general indicator, it's fine. But there is one stat that I do think is bad, genuinely quite a bad stat, and it is scrum percentage. Why do I say scrum percentage? Partly because of the way it's sometimes portrayed by the broadcasters online or on TV. When you see the first scrum packed down, you will sometimes see a scrum stat come up on screen if it's not the pack weight, and you might see the broadcaster mention something like, these guys have got the best scrum in the league. You know, they're scrummaging at 95%. The other guys are only at, 87. And you're like, ooh, they must have a better scrum. No. Scrum stat, it's probably of all the stats, it's almost the one I feel like has the least value. And I have a recent example which will hopefully highlight this point to you if you've been following the Greatest Rivalry Tour. Here's a stat for two different scrums. One team scrums at 100% and one team scrums at 71%. So surely the team with 100% is dominant, right? 100%, what a magnificent stat. The 100% team is the All Blacks, and the 71% team is the Stormers. If you watch that game, you will know the All Blacks conceded many scrum penalties in that game. 4, in fact, and they got free kicked one time as well. So kind of 5 times they packed down a scrum on the Stormers' feed, and the All Blacks ended up getting the ref blowing the whistle against them. Whereas on the flip side, the All Blacks on their feed were able to get 2 penalties off the Stormers. So for mine, the Stormers have got a dominant scrum there. That's 5 against 2, right? But the thing is, on the All Blacks feed, they got a scrum penalty, and then 2, it was either a free kick or scrum, and then 2 that were just like, the ball was played out the back. So on all the All Blacks feeds, there was no negative result for the All Blacks, so they come out with 100%. Whereas the Stormers a couple of times got pinged on their own feed, so it drops to 71. So the scrum percentage is only telling you, on your own feed, did you secure the ball or a penalty or a free kick? If yes, it's a check. If not, it's a black mark on your record. So somehow the Stormers come out of this one because they got pinged on their own feed with a worse scrum percentage. But anyone who watched that game knows there was only one side really with a scrum in trouble in that game, and it was the All Blacks. They conceded literally double the penalties at scrum time. So I feel like take scrum percentage with a bit of a grain of salt. All stats you need to be cautious of, but scrum percentage for mine is genuinely one of the worst. Like, I've been following stats for years, and for a long time the Springboks scrum stats have not been, like, they're not the best. But you look at the scrum on the field and you're like, man, that's a pretty good scrum. Best in the world. So, yes, 5 stats which need a little bit more context with a little bit of caution. As I said, I still like stats. I do think they tell a story about the way a team is looking to play the game. You can sometimes highlight areas where teams are lacking a bit of punch. Maybe they don't bust tackles. Maybe they can't get line breaks. Maybe they don't get many meters per carry. All that kind of stuff is really fascinating. But some of it either needs more context or is genuinely not that useful. But you guys let us know your thoughts. Hope you enjoyed a bit of stat chat. If so, feel free to subscribe to the channel. It'd be good to have you along as we cover more of the greatest game. You guys take care of yourselves, and I'll talk to you guys again soon. See you later.